And if you are a patient or patient representative, we encourage you to sit up here as close as you can to the front and on the right side. I guess we can, since we got silence, then we can go ahead and get started. My name is Sarah Eggers, and I'm in CEDAR's Office of Strategic Programs, and I'll be facilitating the discussion later on today. But before we get into the discussion, we want to set a bit of the context for today's discussion, and so I will maybe I'll go over the agenda. Can we do the next slide? So we're going to set the context, and I'll have some of my colleagues come up and do that. And then we'll get into our discussion topic, our first topic of the day, which is patients' perspectives on current HIV treatments and most significant symptoms. And then after the lunch break, we'll come back in the afternoon. Again, we'll set some context on HIV cure research. And then we'll have a discussion on that, particularly getting at patients' perspectives on participating in cure research studies and on the need for good communication through informed consent. We will have an open public comment period at the end of the day. This is all in your agendas. The times are in there. And if you would like to make any comment, anyone's welcome, patient representative or anyone else, to sign up to make a public comment on a topic that might not be as relevant to the discussion topics in the morning and afternoon. We encourage you to do so at the registration desk. And we will take those registrations until the last break in the afternoon. There are restrooms located in about as far away as you can be in the back. If you go behind the little cafeteria down the hallway. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Edward Cox, who will give some welcoming comments.
Thanks, Sarah, and good morning, everybody. And I wanted to start out by welcoming everybody to today's public meeting on patient-focused drug development for HIV and HIV cure research. And I want to thank everybody that's taken the time to come and join us here today, and those that are joining us via the webcast. For those that traveled in, we're glad to see you here safe and sound after a rather eventful series of storms yesterday afternoon, so welcome all. Today's meeting really is an important chance for us to hear from patients and patient advocates. And today's meeting is our second in a series of meetings conducted as part of FDA's Patient-Focused Drug Development Initiative. So this initiative involves obtaining a better understanding of patients' perspectives on a particular disease and treatments. And Teresa Mullen will speak to this a little bit more in just a minute. As part of this initiative, this meeting provides us a chance to hear directly from patients and patient advocates about living with HIV today, including the benefits and downsides of currently available treatments. And as we work through the day, Kim Struble will provide us a brief background discussion about the current status of treatment for HIV. The advances in therapies to manage HIV have really been truly remarkable over the last few decades. And when I joined the FDA, it's been a little bit over a decade ago now, and reflect back upon my time prior to coming to the FDA as an infectious disease fellow at NIAID, over to NIH, and also my time as an ID practitioner. I never really would have imagined that the advances that we've seen in development of antiretroviral therapies would have happened at the rate that they've happened. But so today, HIV infection, is often viewed as a manageable chronic infection. However, we also need to keep in mind that HIV still is a serious and life-threatening condition that can have a significant impact on people's lives. And the New York Times had an article a couple of weeks ago that described this very point. It went through a series of discussions of patients and what they were experiencing with their HIV infection. So I think that really helps to illustrate the points of the challenges of living with HIV today. So we're here today recognizing that there's still more progress to be made and more work to be done to further advance the treatment and management of HIV. The meeting will also give us a chance this afternoon to explore important issues as we look forward to research and development in the area of cure research for HIV. And for the purposes of our meeting today, when we're talking about cure research, we're using the term to refer to any investigation that evaluates a possible therapy intended to control or eliminate HIV infection so that no further medications are needed to maintain health. HIV cure research is an early stages in testing in patients, but the products and approaches being evaluated may represent important foundational work for advances in treating HIV. As in many areas of research, clinical trial studying HIV cure interventions may not provide direct benefit to a participant, but may provide scientific information that could guide future research and drug development. Today's meeting is an important opportunity to hear from and gain an understanding of patients' perspectives on potential benefits and risks of participating in HIV cure research. What we learn today will help us as we evaluate sponsors, study protocols, and informed consent procedures for trials exploring HIV cure research. Ilan Irony from FDA Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research and Sarah Goldkin will give us a presentation this afternoon, provide background for the discussion on the questions that we'll be discussing as part of the HIV cure research discussion this afternoon. Today's meeting focuses on having a conversations with patients and advocates, and Sarah Eggers will guide us through that and give us a little more information on the ground rules as we course through the day. And you'll also notice that my FDA colleagues are sitting to my left here, and they will be here listening carefully to the discussions and occasionally asking clarifying questions as we go through the course of the day. And I thought also at this point what we do is we'd ask folks at the table to introduce themselves, and I'll start with Sarah and then we'll work our way down the table.
Again, my name is Sarah Eggers from the Office of Strategic Programs in the Center of Drug Evaluation and Research.
Good morning, I'm Teresa Mullen. I direct the Office of Strategic Programs in the Center for Drugs, and I'm leading this patient-focused drug development effort for CEDAR.
My name is Debbie Bernkran. I'm Director of the Division of Antiviral Products, and I'm happy to say that I've been with the agency in the same division in different positions, however, since 1989.
Celia Witten. I'm the Office Director of the Office of Cell, Tissue, and Gene Therapy in the Center for Biologics, and our oversight includes products such as gene therapy and cell therapy products.
Ilan Irony. I'm Chief of the General Medicine Branch in the office where Celia is our Director, Dr. Witten, and we covered cell and gene therapies for a variety of indications, including HIV, which is a major component of the work we do.
Hi, I'm Adam Sherwatt from the Division of Antiviral Products, a medical officer.
Great, thank you. And as Sarah's mentioned, at the end of the afternoon we'll have an open comment period, and for folks that are interested At the registration table out by the doors where you came in is a sign-up sheet, so we do ask that you sign up if you would like to make comments at the end of the day, and particularly in areas of, if there are comments that have not been covered over the course of the day's discussions. We're happy to see so many folks here, and we know that a number of folks are joining us via the web for today's meeting, and we're excited to see the level of interest by patient advocates, researchers, drug developers, government agencies, and other stakeholders that have joined us here today. The disease HIV has served to unite us in a common goal, the continual search for safe and effective therapies to help millions of people that are affected with the disease. And FDA has an important part in drug development, but we also have to recognize, too, that FDA's role is really only a part. FDA's key role is to ensure the safety of clinical trials and also the safety and effectiveness of products that are approved. Critically important to the overall process and the development of new medications is the collective work and participation of researchers, drug developers, patient communities, patients, and all coming together to advance the field and the study of new agents for HIV care. So with that, I want to thank all for joining us, and we look forward to a productive day and discussion and opportunity to listen and to learn from the comments that we hear. And I'll now turn it over to Teresa Mullen, who will talk to us a little bit more about the patient-focused drug development activities. Thank you all. Teresa.
Thank you, Ed. And thank you to the people who just pulled my slides up. So good morning. I'm Teresa Mullen. You know that already. But I'm going to talk about this patient-focused drug development initiative overall that in this meeting is the second that we're having under this initiative that we're beginning under PDUFA 5, and I'll say a little bit more about that. And we plan to continue this effort. We're in a sort of a learning mode generally about this process that we're using to get input, as well as learning in this case and today about the questions that we're asking in particular for patient input related to HIV drug development and cure research. So just to go on a bit here, this patient-focused drug development initiative is connected very closely to an effort at FDA and CDER to develop a more formalized framing for benefit-risk assessment for new drugs. And of course, FDA, in any decision-making related to marketing of drugs, weighs the benefits against the risks to determine whether or not the drug can be approved and put on the market. And that benefit risk assessment framework includes whether the severity of the condition, the degree of unmet need, and we just consider those two components, severity of condition and degree of unmet need, to really constitute the clinical context. And we recognize that patients have a unique and pretty critical perspective on FDA's understanding of that clinical context. Patients are the ones who take the medicines, will get any benefit that can be gotten from it, will also suffer all the risks. So we really need a better understanding. We have some ways to obtain that kind of input today through an advisory committee, but that's usually on a particular drug. And through our patient representative program. And again, those are very valuable venues, but they're limited. So we're undertaking this patient-focused drug development effort to have a chance to talk to patients about questions that the review divisions are sort of grappling with or would really like to get greater input related to them, to give them greater insight about how patients feel about the disease that they're living with and the therapies that they may or may not have. To help us with both informing drug development efforts and the review of an application that comes in after we have this kind of input, to really have that extra insight that we may not have prior to hearing from you. So it's really, that's why we focus this meeting on hearing from patients. When we get to the public input part at the end, others can speak, but before that, everybody else is in listening mode. And so as part of PDUFA 5, which was reauthorized last year, we agreed to have at least 20 of these kinds of meetings in different disease areas over the next 5 years. We really, our review division staff are here to hear what you have to tell us, or they're listening in through our webcast. But that's one of the key listening groups. But we hope that patients, patient advocates, healthcare providers in the disease area, drug developers are also able to listen to what we hear and what we learn in these meetings. So how did this process start? Well, I would say that, we waited till the ink dried on the reauthorization, but we didn't actually wait till the ink dried. We started last summer, and when we expected to get reauthorization, to try to talk to the review divisions and others in the FDA, and also we're listening to patients who've been talking to us throughout the reauthorization process and giving us their input with negotiations of PDUFA, to sort of look at what kinds of criteria should we use to pick the diseases. Because one thing we did hear from patient groups is concern that we were doing so few. I mean, there are so many diseases, and 20 doesn't sound like a big number when you think about how many diseases there are that for which drugs are developed. But we tried to develop criteria. I'll tell you in a minute what criteria we used. And we went to the review divisions to ask what disease areas would you nominate for public comment. We developed a list. We published that list in September of last year. We had a public meeting in October to get input initially and talk about the list and our thinking. We got about 4,500 comments into the docket on this. There were about 90 disease areas identified through that public docket process. And we went back and analyzed what we got from the public docket and from the input in the meeting, talked again to the review divisions to sort of identify what diseases will we try to cover in the next 3 years. And so we didn't want to speak for the whole 5 years. We went with the first 3, and it was based on a combination of questions that are before the review divisions now or that they see coming, where they had a sort of more urgent need to hear in certain disease areas. There are other diseases we were covering in other venues, so a variety of factors were taken into consideration, including what we heard in the docket and what patients identified as most critical. And that's how we developed this list, which we published on April 11th, and it's available on the internet. You can see the list that we have for this first 3 years. And in 2015, we'll come back again and finish it and say what other diseases we're going to cover in those last 2 years of this PDUFA reauthorization. And so here we have the disease criteria that we had developed. And so we were looking for diseases that were largely chronic and symptomatic, and that would affect the functioning or the quality of daily life of the patients. And thus, a really critical aspect is hearing firsthand from patients how it feels to live with the disease. Diseases for which we really are not capturing those considerations very well in our clinical trials today and the endpoints we have today, and diseases where there are currently no good therapies or very few therapies available. We wanted to capture a range of diseases where there was a range of severity, and maybe there are subpopulations that experience different severity, perhaps the elderly or a pediatric population. And also, as a set, we wanted to cover a wide range of disease areas and affected populations in this set of 20. So that went into our thinking and what disease areas we chose. Now, there's a very diverse set there. And so each of these meetings will be designed slightly differently. We have some standard questions that we had patients help us develop. We have periodically convene patient groups will meet with us to help us think through process considerations related to all these meetings. We got a lot of great input from those sessions that we've had so far, and to make the questions that we are our basic questions as relevant and kind of meaningfully worded as possible going in to talk to patients. But we heard from patients in those meetings that we have to make sure we modify the questions to fit the special considerations of the disease that they are experiencing, and also the questions that reviewers in particular wanted to cover. We've modified the questions today along those lines for this HIV drug development and research. We're also, as we go through this, experimenting with different methods, because we're really learning how to do this, and one of the things we're trying to balance here is folks that are able to make it here and those who can't. And a lot of patients, for various reasons, whether it's the cost of getting here or just the inconvenience or the lack of mobility they may experience. We want to make sure we have good methods for remote participation. And so this is our second meeting. The first one we had was on chronic fatigue syndrome, and that was held in April. And so we're trying some new technologies today. We have webcast is interactive today, and so that'll be a new thing. And we're going to try using the clicker technology for some questions that are asked later to try to get a sense of patients' responses and how you feel about those questions. And we'll see how that goes. It's a little bit of a work in progress. We're trying to see what's the best way to get the kind of input we're trying to achieve in these meetings. We'll be successful if we get input on how people feel about it, very frank, candid input. We hope to and plan to faithfully capture that, capture the words, capture the way that it's described to us, provide that back to review divisions, and we're going to be developing meeting reports that we'll also post on our website from what we capture in our meetings. And just a little bit more about the format. We'll try to format each of these meetings to really capture the best way to get input on, and it's a little bit based on the questions that we have and perhaps the patient population that we're trying to work with. So with that, I'll turn it over to our next speaker, and we're really looking forward to hearing your perspective today. It will be very helpful to us going forward in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Kim Struble, and I'm going to be giving you a background on current HIV treatment, a very brief background to put into context the discussions that will occur later this morning. As we all know, HIV was identified in 1983, and after 30 years, there's still no vaccine or cure, although a lot of research is ongoing, and that's going to be the focus of our discussions for this afternoon. More than 1.1 million people in the United States are living with HIV, and despite all the prevention efforts, that's about 50,000 new infections per year in the United States, and that's been fairly consistent over the last several years. We at FDA recognize that HIV/AIDS is a serious and life-threatening disease, and each antiretroviral therapy has its own benefits and unique toxicities or risks. And your input today is very important to us and for drug development process in general. So FDA works with many groups, such as industry, academia, and patient groups, to foster improvements to existing therapy approaches. There's also continued development of novel therapy approaches. And this is really the focus of today's meeting, because your input and perspectives really help us and hopefully industry and academia to move the drug development process forward. As we all know, antiretroviral therapy has benefits, and today's treatments are highly successful. And the recommended treatment is 3 or more antiretroviral regimens. And the benefits of this treatment is that people are living near normal lifespans and is being treated as a chronic disease today. And there's been significant improvements in the last several years for these treatment regimens. And the picture on the left shows a handful of antiretrovirals is what patients used to have to take. And today on the picture on the right, shows a simplified dosing regimen. So many patients have available to them one pill that's a complete regimen that they can take once a day. But we all know antiretroviral therapy comes with many side effects. They can be both short-term and long-term side effects. The short-term effects can be some GI toxicities such as diarrhea, nausea, can be headaches, sleep disturbances, skin changes, and there's also those long-term effects such as body changes, kidney or liver, heart or bone effects. And antiretroviral therapy can affect the quality of life, and these side effects of this therapy can worsen over time. We know that there's downsides to taking therapy because we recognize it takes a lot of energy and commitment to adhere to a lifelong treatment. And we know that people get fatigued. They get fatigued from having to take medications every day. They also get fatigued from having to live with a lifelong and long-term condition. And the natural response is people may not want to take treatment anymore. But we do know from recent studies show that taking pill holidays or stopping or restarting your medications can result in serious health risks. Therefore, it's important for all of us to find ways to take medications daily, because we all know that suboptimal adherence could lead to loss of virologic response and resistance. So input and perspectives that we hear today will also help foster, hopefully, additional drug development to deal with some of these issues. So we do want your perspectives. And the topic for this morning discussions are going to center around current HIV treatments and your most significant symptoms. We are definitely interested in your input on what are you currently doing to help manage your HIV and symptoms. How well does your current treatment treat your significant symptoms? What are the most significant downsides to your treatments, and how do they affect your daily life? And what specific things do you look for in an ideal treatment to manage your condition? And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah Eggers, who's going to give us an overview of the discussion format, and we are very much looking forward to your input today. Thank you.
Okay, now the work begins. So I want to thank my colleagues for setting the context. And now we're going to look for the patients and patient representatives to provide the real input. And when I say patients, when we all say patients, we're using that as a shorthand to be people living with HIV. And patient representatives, we're using that as a shorthand to be caretakers, loved ones, advocates who speak on behalf of patients and who can really kind of directly represent other people, the points of view of people living with HIV. So the discussion will be rather different from the types of government-sponsored public meetings that you may have participated in. And as Dr. Mullen described, today's questions and discussion format were developed based on a standard structure for the patient-focused drug development meetings. This morning we will focus on the current landscape of HIV and its treatment. And we're going to break this morning's discussion into two parts. We'll first focus on HIV treatments before the break. And we're going to include discussion on what are the good things about today's treatments and what are the downsides. And after the break, we'll focus on the most significant symptoms that HIV patients experience because of their HIV infection or because of the treatments that they take to control the infection. So I'm going to spend a few minutes just to go over the discussion format and some important ground rules to ensure an effective and fair dialogue. And at this point, I'm going to ask the folks who are serving on the panel discussion for the morning to work their way up to the front and take a seat. And I'm also going to ask for the clickers to be handed out to anyone who is a patient or patient representative who identifies themselves as such, including up here, please. Okay. So we are first going to hear from a panel of patients and patient representatives. And the purpose here is to really set a good foundation for our discussion. There are 4 panel discussants this morning. I'll introduce them in a bit. And they represent a range of experience with HIV and HIV advocacy. They've each prepared some minutes of comments in response to the questions. And after we hear from them, as long as time permits, we will have follow-up questions for the panel, and my FDA colleagues can help ask those questions. After the panel discussion, we'll broaden the dialogue to include other patients and representatives in the audience. And I hope that if you identify as a patient or patient representative, you are sitting in these first front, the first 4 rows here on my right. The purpose here is to really build on the experiences shared by the panel and get a sense for what's generally similar and what may be different in your experiences from what you heard. So I'll be asking a number of follow-up questions and inviting participants to raise their hand to speak. And we're going to have FDA staff around with microphones to come to you, so you don't have to go to a microphone. And if I can see name tags, especially if you're sitting as close as possible to the front, I can call on you by name. I'll be working to try to give priority to people who haven't spoken. As long as who's comfortable speaking, we hope that you get to speak as much as you want to today. And we are trying something new. Let's see. Today, this is an experiment. We will be periodically inviting those of you in person and those of you on the web to respond to specific polling questions. The purpose here is really to aid the discussion, to see how many participants share a particular perspective. So the in-person participants will use the clickers, and we'll practice that in a minute. And those participating by the live webcast can add comments through the web, through the polling questions that will be up on your screen at the appropriate time. We do have a lot of people participating on the web, and this meeting is your meeting as well. Those participating can add comments through the webcast comment box. And again, we would ask for the comments to come primarily from people who identify as themselves as patients or patient representatives. This meeting is being transcribed, and we have many people on our team taking detailed notes. So we are listening to what you are saying. There are a few ground rules that will ensure that this meeting adds the most value to FDA and to the patients and patient representatives and to all the others listening here today. We are first and foremost here to learn about the perspective of people who have this condition, who live with HIV. So I'm going to ask all the patients and patient representatives to contribute. We are very happy to see participants here who represent industry, research, and government agencies, and a number of other stakeholders. And we believe that this input is as important to you as it is to us. We just ask that you stay in listening mode and do not contribute to the discussion. Again, there's an open public comment period that we would welcome your participation in. So the purpose of the opening panel is really to give the discussion a good foundation, but the opening panelists their comments have no greater weight than anyone on the web or in the audience. And we will be taking all the comments and listening carefully and incorporating all of those into our final report. So this meeting is a bit different in that we hope to have the discussion flow, building off on what people say. So since you don't have to come and stand in line at the microphones, we really hope that you can, when you have a thought and it comes to mind, that you can say it as the discussion is flowing, and we'll have a really good flowing discussion today. If we don't get everyone's full thoughts on a topic, we strongly need to encourage you to elaborate on your comments in the public docket. And our meeting webpage has that information on how you can contribute. And we really encourage everyone, even if you're here today, to follow up and to elaborate on what you share today through the public comment so that we can review those comments as well. Our discussion today will focus on the common ground regarding the symptoms, impacts, treatment, and research regarding HIV. We understand there are other important issues to ensuring that people with HIV get the health care, treatment, and support that they need, and those are very important issues. But for our facilitated discussion today, we want to focus on the questions that are being asked, the topic that FDA needs the most input on today. Our discussion may touch upon specific treatments. However, the discussion of any specific treatment should be done in a way that helps understand the broader issues, such as what symptoms various treatments address or what general downsides treatments have. Therefore, as part of my job today, I'll keep asking questions that keep us on this common ground, keep us from getting too narrowly focused. And again, there's the docket for which you can elaborate. Okay. So the FDA staff is here to listen. And there is some time for FDA to sort of comment and provide some remarks at the end of the facilitated discussion. Now I'm going to give a personal disclaimer. I am not an expert in HIV or its treatment, and I, in particular, have a really hard time pronouncing drug names. So if I can do it, I won't say any today. But so I'll stay more general. But that is why we have our FDA colleagues, my colleagues up here, who are the real experts in this, and they are helping me with some detailed follow-up questions. So I thank them for contributing their time. We do want your feedback on this meeting. That participant feedback is very important, and we have evaluation forms that I believe are at the front table, and if they're not up there now, then they will be during the breaks or at lunch. And we really encourage you to grab one of those evaluation forms, completely voluntary, and submit them to the front desk and provide your feedback. Above all, courtesy and respect is paramount and so critical to a discussion like this. Our goal today is really to enable a fair and open discussion, so please wait to be acknowledged before speaking. Speak into the microphone, and if you feel comfortable, we ask that you also just state your first and last name so that our transcriptionist can capture that, and we can put that into our transcription. Of course, avoid negative and derogatory language, but I don't have to say that here. And keep all side conversations to a minimum, and if you have to take a phone call, please do so, out in the hallway. If at any point you need to get up, feel free. I said the restrooms were located behind the cafeteria down a pretty long hallway, and we'll be taking a break at some point in the middle of our discussion. That was a lot of talking on my part. I am excited to turn it over, but before we do, we want to practice the clickers and the web polling. So Chad, if we can have questions 1 through 5. We're going to ask a few demographic questions because we'd like to get a sense of who's in the room and who's participating via the webcast. And we'll see how this goes. These are no longer draft. These are in real time. We are moving ahead with these questions. So the first question is an easy one. Do you live within the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area or outside of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area? And you click in person, click the corresponding number on your keypad. Okay. And I think once everyone's done that, then the results will come up. I'm not sure how much time we get. Okay, great. And this is Chad up here, and he is instrumental into making this work today, so I thank him. Okay, 50%, great. Okay. That was easy, so okay. Questions? We all know how to work the clickers? All right, let's go on to what is your age? Younger than 25, 25, 34, 35, 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, or 65 and greater. Okay. Great. It's nice to see that we have our distinguished guests here today. All right, can we move on to the next question? Okay. Are you male, female, transgender, or prefer not to answer? Okay. A pretty balanced split there, with 60% male. Okay, moving on to the next question. Have you been diagnosed as having HIV infection? Okay. Great. So about half of you are here living with, half of the patients and patient representatives in person are living with the condition, and half of you are speaking on behalf of those who do. And I'm going to give my personal thanks to those living with the condition. It can take a lot of courage, and we really do thank you. Can I ask on the web, can we get the sense of how many people are living with HIV?
About 92%.
Okay, great. So we really, we're.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's the opposite. I'm looking at the wrong one. 6% or 7%.
6%. Okay. So we are listening to you as well, even if your comments aren't summarized today and in their entirety, or at all depend on how the discussion flows. But we are listening to your comments. We will be reviewing them. Okay. So with that, let's start with the first panel discussion to give a few remarks. And I'm going to introduce them. We have David Breakbull. Did I pronounce that right, David? Okay. I'm a little bit better with last names than I am with drug names, but still not perfect. We have Melanie Reese. We have Joseph Jefferson. From the, oh, Joseph, can you, I forgot my notes up here.
I'm Director of Advocacy and Alliance Development with Health HIV, and I'm also a patient.
Okay. And we have Catherine Connor from the Elizabeth Glazier Pediatric AIDS Foundation. Okay. So we're going to start with David, and if you could just give a few remarks that answer, let me get to the questions. Again, we're focusing this first part on treatments to manage HIV. So what you're currently doing to help manage your HIV, what you see as the greatest benefits of those treatments, and the most significant downsides to those treatments.
Well, besides the usual HIV treatments, because of advanced age and other comorbidities, I also take a daily dose of Lipitor. I'm on Lisinopril for high blood pressure. And I do as much as possible with diet and exercise to try to control symptoms as well. Probably the biggest challenge that I think a lot of people have is access to alternative therapies. You know, depending on where you live in the country, sometimes you have access to those and sometimes you don't. So I think that's something that's been proven to work in a lot of instances, but that's not always available to folks. Going to A and B as well.
No, you can keep going. Do you have any?
So the specific symptoms that my treatments address, obviously the high blood pressure, the high triglycerides. One of the things that I recently found out that I'm sort of waiting to see if some of the symptoms I've been experiencing. About 3 years ago, my physician changed my regimen. When he changed my regimen, he didn't change my Lipitor, which was contraindicated with Brezista. And so about 3 weeks ago, I go to the pharmacy to get my prescription, and I noticed it's a smaller pill. And so even 3 years after being on a contraindicated regimen, it took a pharmacist to say, whoa, you shouldn't be taking this. So even though I consider myself pretty savvy about the treatments that are available, that was one that got past me. So I'm kind of sort of waiting to see if some of the muscle aches and those kinds of things that are indicated as side effects of statins will subside as the treatment sort of adjusts itself. As far as how long I've been on treatment, I started in 1999. My first regimen was AZT, 3TC before they were Comavir, and Viracept, which if anybody was around Viracept, not one of the ones we use much anymore at all. And then I switched to Crixivan and Comavir and Norvir. First 400, and then 800, 100. Those of you who prescribe know what I'm talking about. And 100, of course, boosted Norvir. Never failed a regimen, and simply changed regimens to downplay side effects and to go to safer. The last change I made was, again, about 3 years ago, to Truvada, Brezista, and of course boosted Norvir again. And probably the best results I've seen in terms of T-cell. But even on the early regimen with the Viracept and the AZT3TC, my viral load was suppressed fairly quickly. I was diagnosed with full-blown AIDS. Well, we don't use full-blown because AIDS is what it is. With 7 T cells, and within about 6 to 8 months, was able to get my viral load suppressed. So I think probably because I'm a good patient and I take all my pills most of the time, I'm probably one of the poster childs for success stories of ART.
Do you have, that's great. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to Melanie Reese, who will share her experiences.
Yes, and you asked him.
Oh, can we turn?
You asked him to identify who he was?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a consumer. I live with HIV, but I'm also a patient advocate, a patient educator, a community health planner. I'm a caretaker, a lobbyist. You wear many hats, okay?
Thank you.
And I was diagnosed in 1999. And I began taking antiretrovirals in 2004. I asked to get on it because, according to the CDC guidelines at that time, 350 T cells or less they recommended. But that was before name-based reporting. I didn't want my name to get on the books, just my unique identifier. So I asked to get on medications because I'd been on medications all my life, and I've had chronic illnesses since birth. So what's another pill or two or three or whatever to keep living? So so I've been on medication for 9 years. I'm on the same regimen. However, starting in 2004, it was 3 pills. And then it wasn't even 3 years later, it went to 2, Truvada and Cystiva. And then now I'm on the 1 pill a day, Atripla. But it's the same regimen. And my viral load never got higher than 6,500. And so the next visit, I was suppressed, and I've been suppressed ever since. Because I have a multitude of other chronic illnesses, my HIV is not something that my doctors are concerned with. It's everything else. And some of the treatments that would be the best for those conditions, I can't have because of my antiretrovirals. They don't want that to be compromised in any way. So I have chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, chronic bronchial asthma. I have seizure syndrome. I have degenerative disc disease of my spine. I have arthritis, osteopenia, which is the precursor to osteoporosis. I have arthritis, bursitis, tendonitis. The list goes on. And so and I have irritable bowel. It's been going on long enough. It's chronic, and they don't know if it's the disease or the syndrome. But because the immune system is primarily in the gut, when you already have gut issues, even if it's a slight chance to have gastro discomfort, it's magnified. So I have to take Miralax, Metamucil, Imodium extra strength. It's a combination plus. I take dicyclomine for my stomach issues and pain. I have GERD. If anybody doesn't know, that's gastroesophageal reflux disease. And so I have to take Omeprazole. I take Lipitor. I take Qvar. I take ProAir. I take I'm bipolar, so I take Zoloft. And I used to take Depakote for mood, but since I had a concussion, had a seizure, brain surgery and all, they had to take Depakote away and give me Keppra. It's a long name because I don't know if it's generic or what, but Keppra I can pronounce. So I have chronic pain. I cannot take anything for pain other than if it gets too severe, I can take Tylenol. But I have stomach issues where my lining gets very thin. And just so that it won't rupture, I can only take that periodically. So I just have to grin and bear it.
Well, we will have a lot of follow-up questions, I think, after the break on how you manage all of that. But thank you so much for sharing that. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, or should we move on to Joseph?
I'll go ahead and move on.
Okay.
Because
We'll move to Joseph.
Well, I just have to start by saying when I read the questions that were disseminated, I sort of had to ask myself if I was the appropriate candidate to speak. That's perhaps because my status is yields a somewhat boring analysis. I've been positive for 25 years, asymptomatic for 25 years, virally suppressed for 25 years. In the early years, there were a number of meds that came and went. I've been on a fairly consistent regimen for the last 8 years. I get sick less often than virtually everybody I know. So I'm sort of this outlier, perhaps. But I thought, after giving it a little reflection, that, folks in this room need to hear from those of us that are actually faring well. And I can't really go any further on a personal level without acknowledging the folks that stood on the steps of this building, of nearby buildings 20 years ago fighting to get in, and here we are on the inside. Yes. So I thank them. I thank all the folks at FDA that responded. I definitely want to, tip my hat to the brilliant research community and to industry for really stepping up, and I likely would not be here were it not for the efforts of those groups. So that's my story. I suppose I wanted to also come and give a voice also to those of us that are now I'm well situated in, and many others are about to enter the new sort of emerging demographic of interest, which is, of course, the over 50 population with HIV. And of course, most everybody in this room knows that in 2 years, more than half of all folks living with HIV will be over the age of 50. And I think that presents a whole wide variety of challenges, both in the clinical trial setting as well as in adherence issues, which is a big concern of mine that I'll get more into in the facilitated discussion later, because I think that there are some things that we need to press forward on as it relates to tailoring treatment methodologies and adherence interventions for those of us that are going to be soon likely managing morbidities that are typically associated with folks 10 and 20 years older than we are. So there's a lot of work to do, and I'm happy to participate in the discussion. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And then we'll move on to Catherine Connor, who will provide, we've asked her to sit up here and provide the pediatric point of view to make sure that very important population is represented today. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. And I have the unenviable position of trying to describe what the pediatric population is now. It used to be very easy to say, especially when you look at the legacy of Elizabeth's Foundation, of what the fight looked like. And now, when you have to remember that pediatric covers a wide range. And when you talk about managing symptoms and the drug regimens, when you go from a neonate up to the youth and teen years, even into college now, it's really a diverse population, and the needs of that population are really diverse. And then sometimes you forget that, especially with the younger children, you have somebody else who's involved in this, which is the caregiver. And the caregiver actually has a lot and may have differing opinions than the patient as to how to manage the symptoms and what needs to be done. And so I think it's important with this group in particular to think about how the drugs are administered, how tough the adherence is for the different age groups in particular. As when it comes to the impact of the side effects, you actually don't see necessarily more side effects in children than in adults when it comes to using these drugs, but the impact of the side effects on young people and in children can be very dramatic. Before this meeting, we actually worked with AIDS Alliance to talk to some of the beneficiaries and the families that we work with. And it was interesting when you talk to both the children and the young people and their parents, some of the ones that came to the top were some of the night terrors and insomnia. If you're a 6-year-old or 7-year-old living with HIV having night terrors, the impact of that on you is different than an adult who knows how to deal with it. Same thing with some of the gastrointestinal issues that come with medicine. As an adult, you kind of know how to deal with it. As a child who's in school or a child who doesn't even really know their status because of disclosure decisions made by the adult, how they handle those side effects can be very different as well. Something that also came up in our conversations was an acknowledgement of some of the longer term impacts. And we have folks on the panel who've been addressing their status for a number of years. With children, obviously, one of my colleagues likes to say, it's not always the immediate side effects. You have to think about the bones, the body, and the brain, because all those things are developing at a time they're taking toxic drugs to deal with a chronic illness. And so, you do see the longer term things that are still being studied, the developmental issues that a lot of people growing up with HIV or infected as youth with HIV have, impact on their organs. We have a number of families that we work with that now, being a 20-year-old who's had HIV since they were either perinatally infected or infected as a youth or a young child, really are getting more and more of the type of things where they have to worry about the impact of a lifetime on ARVs. What it's done to their bodies and how they continue to live. And again, acknowledging sort of the different side effects as these kids grow up. When you talk to these families and these young people, they actually switch regimens quite often because puberty affects them differently, and how, anyone who knows the word pharmacokinetics, you really do start to have to shift and change a lot and more frequently as a child on HIV medicine or as a young adult on HIV medicine. And so they may have actually, their bodies are a little bit more worn down and the side effects change as they use these drugs in different age groups. And two last points I kind of wanted to make on this topic is, when you talk about managing HIV, we work with a practitioner here in DC who often remarks on how she has young people, in their teens that are already on salvage therapy. And this is because it's a very specific population who have gone through first line, second line. There just aren't a lot of options for them. And I think that's something that's really important on the research agenda, that these kids do end up on some really harsh drugs at a very young age. And we have to keep that in mind as we start to look for better formulations with the least amount of side effects with the most effectiveness. That needs to be kept in mind. Also, and I thought about holding this off for the adherence conversation, but I think it's also important to mark for this patient population, is sort of how the use of drugs impacts when they transition to adult care. Because a lot of times the adult HIV treatment community is a little bit more lockstep. Oh, you're infected, here's our first line, here we go. These are folks who have complicated medical histories. They've been on a number of treatments. They know their side effects. They probably know more about HIV than all of us, having grown up with it. But sometimes when they transition to adult care, that isn't recognized or understood. And so a lot of times that can impact adherence, but it also impacts how these treatments affect them, because there isn't this recognition as a young person or a child who's lived with this for a long time when they get to that new part of the health system.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Do any of my FDA colleagues have a real question that they want to ask to one of the panel members before we move out to the large discussion? We'll be able to engage you guys as well then too. Okay. Then we're gonna move to the facilitated discussion. I'm gonna make my way out to the front as it was called in our first meeting, talk show style. So we'll see how that goes. And if we can get the next question up. I can't squeeze through. Yeah. Don't answer this question. Oh yes, we haven't answered this question. Is this on? Okay, I'm going to do my best to talk into the microphone, but sometimes I get a little lazy at that, so please let me know if you can't hear me. So we'll ask this question before we get into the discussion. So how long ago was your diagnosis for those living with HIV in person and on the web? So it looks like everyone here is 10 years ago or more. Although we do have the pediatric population represented here. Do we have those numbers on the web? Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, more than 20 years ago, and it's 100%, but only 4 people have responded.
All right, so we will frame this as having lots of wisdom in the room and on the web. There's another question? Okay, so we'd like to get a sense of how many different types of ART regimens have you taken? You've never taken any, currently on your first, have taken 2 to 3 different regimens, more regimens, or if you're not sure. Okay. So again, lots of wisdom in the room, lots of experience with many different things. Everyone's taken at least 2 or more regimens. Okay. Great. So we heard a lot of great things from the panel's discussion up at front, and I'm going to follow up on a few of those things and get more feedback. And again, I encourage my FDA colleagues to follow up. We heard a lot about the benefits, being able to lead life with a chronic condition and living it for a long time. So I'd like to follow up on that a bit more. And I'd like to follow up on a few of the issues regarding decision making, about how you choose a regimen and how you choose to change a regimen. And then look at some of the downsides of the regimens that we heard about, particularly the complexity of that treatment that Melanie was talking about, and also David, you alluded to that as well, with the contraindications and the effects on the other conditions that you have. So with that, let's start with the benefits of the current medications out there. We heard from the panelists up here, but I'd like to see if any of you in the audience wants to sort of echo or follow up on what you heard about the benefits that were mentioned up here. Anyone? Yes, we have.
Hi, everybody. I'm Matt Sharp. I'm a long-term survivor, and obviously have had a lot of benefits with treatments. I wanted to bring up one thing that I've had to experience, and that's immunologic non-response to the therapies. I've been pretty tolerant of almost every medication I've been on, except for, let's say, Fusion. That's supposed to be a joke. But I never was able to really respond immunologically. So I just wanted to bring that up as an important issue with the state of therapy today.
Would anyone else like to comment on what they see as the real, benefits of today's treatments? Oh, yes, David.
Well, I think the benefit, in terms of particularly people who are newly diagnosed, you can start on a once-a-day, single pill regimen. For me, even changing regimens when I was undetectable was a tough decision, because, if it ain't broke, why fix it? So my doctor even trying to convince me that you need to move to these safer regimens was something I struggled with. It's like, but if I change and it doesn't work, then am I using up one of those pools of meds that I have access to? But I think a thing that sort of concerns me at the same time is, even though we have simpler therapies, those of you who are familiar with the treatment cascade, we're not really seeing any improvement in viral suppression. So there's something about how we're approaching taking medicine with suppression of the virus. You know, I don't know whether it's because we're asking people to start treatment before they're ready, whether there's not the correct amount of counseling and advice around that. But that sort of disturbs me, that even though we have simpler regimens, we're not really seeing an increase in the number of people who have suppressed viral loads.
Would any of my colleagues like to ask a follow-up question to that? Yes, Catherine.
Actually, this is just a comment, but I just wanted to comment on actually the phrasing of the question again for my population. The rest of your life is a very deep thing for young people. And, you know, again, I'm 37, the rest of my life feels like next weekend. But, you know, for them, it is a very daunting idea, and especially when you have an asymptomatic young person who is looking at having these pills. And again, as we've moved to one-a-day pills, that this is lessened a little bit, but it is very, very daunting to tell an 8-year-old or 12-year-old or even a 15-year-old that you're gonna have to do this the rest of your life. And I think that's why you do, again, I know this is more an adherence issue, but it's a different discussion with that population. And I think that's why you see such erratic adherence issues with that population, because that question in its own right is sort of heart-stopping for that population in a way I don't think it is necessarily for newly infected adult patients.
Yes, go Melanie.
I appreciate your comment for the pediatric, but that applies across the age spectrum, because people don't want to take anything if they're feeling okay, and they'll take it, and then somebody will tell you, oh, you are UD, undetectable. Why do I have to take this now? Oh, well, it's hard to wrap people. I started off my life with medication, so I know you take it regardless so you don't die. So, but most of the population, that does not compute.
And can you get Melanie and Catherine from the pediatric perspective, can you get a little bit more into what you hear, the reasons that they give for not wanting to be on those medications? Do they, for example, say, well, I'll go back on them when I need to, or do they have other reasons? And feel free, anyone can answer that.
There are lots of reasons. Some, if they are trying to get in a relationship or are in a relationship and have not yet disclosed, they don't want anybody seeing them taking their medications. So they'll avoid taking medications if their companion, friend, or are around. Some, it's even their family. If their family knew that they were infected with HIV, they would be rejected, wouldn't be allowed to eat at the big table or with regular utensils. Everything has to be plastic to be thrown away. So it runs the gamut, the reasons why people don't want to take it.
Catherine?
And sort of, as I mentioned in my opening comments, I'm talking about a wide range of people here. We see a lot of folks who've just, again, they're growing up with HIV population. It's a little bit of exhaustion. I don't think that's unique to them, but you know, they've been on this medication for years. They've probably been on their third. Some of them would just sort of rather not. You know, we have a couple of families. I mean, again, the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation's been around for 25 years. And some of these families we've worked with a long time, you do see patients who just sort of throw in the towel. They're just a little exhausted from, again, the side effects of it, the memory lapses, inability to kind of, you know, have people understand what they're going through. They'd just rather not take treatment. You know, with other folks, again, more the youth infected, again, it is the cavalierness of, I don't have any symptoms, I've taken this medication, I don't feel like I have to. And, you know, part of this is attributable to just being young people. I mean, you know, you can only ask so much maturity from a certain age demographic, but I do think you say that. And I do have one, you know, again, a lot of the work that we do also is with the provider community. And I do think that where people get their care and information dramatically impacts whether you answer this question one way or another. You know, again, in a lot of the pediatric care settings, you have some really dedicated professionals who are very good at explaining to parents and children why they need to take this and supporting them, even in decisions to switch medications and discussing side effects. Other parts of the provider community are not as good at that. And so I think it really does matter, not just the medication itself, but how the medication is explained and the support they get while taking medication.
Great, thank you. I'm going to come out, before I take one more, let's actually ask this question that's up here on the screen. So if you have your clickers, please feel free to answer it on the web. For those that are living with HIV, which of the following statements best reflects your overall perspective on having to take multiple HIV medications every day for the rest of your life? Maybe you take multiple, or maybe you just take one, but thinking about having to take multiple, does overall, it does not or would not have a significant impact on my daily life. Overall, it does or would have a significant impact on my daily life, but I feel that I am able or would be able to take my medicines as prescribed by my doctor. Overall, it does or would have a significant impact on my daily life, and I'm worried that I might not be able to take my medications every day as prescribed by my doctor, or if you're not sure which of those statements reflects your perspective. We'll give a few more seconds. Okay, we can put those up. So really a wide range. So yes, it's a big burden for a lot of folks in the room. On the web,
About 80% said it does or would have a significant impact. The total N is 5.
okay, but that they would be able to, or they would not be able to. So the middle choice.
The second choice, it
Yes.
does would have a significant impact.
Okay, so it sounds like it does or would have a significant impact on life, though it for many of you would be manageable. Does anyone want to follow up on that? And I think Randy had someone. And could you state your name, please?
Good morning. My name is Nathaniel Scruggs. I was listening, and I was thinking about my own journey getting to this seat where I'm at today. And I was listening to the panel. I think in dealing with AIDS, HIV, and I heard y'all mention that this is the second of this type of event or coming together. But when I first found out, I didn't want nobody to know. I just didn't. I didn't want nobody to know, and that was because of my ignorance. That was because of my ignorance, and it was because of the way society viewed and the information that was presented about people living with HIV and AIDS. I was fortunate to be ignorant enough to go seek out help through alternative groups, and was blessed to get a provider who could tolerate my ignorance and disrespectful behavior based off of the fear of what was projected to me through the community. So I didn't know. And I was listening, you know, how I think one of the key things that is misgiving in the treatment of HIV and AIDS is that you can't lump everybody in the same basket, in which I know the government has what it's supposed to do and the policies set, but they just talked about it. You can't take a child that was born with AIDS or HIV through their mother and subject them to what you expect a hardcore drug addict, sexual promiscuous, heterosexual male to deal with in taking medicine. So I think what's happening here is vital to what's the next step going on in the treatment of HIV and AIDS, because this is what needs to take place. You need to have everybody sitting in a room and discussing their perspective or their point of view around how they feel and what do they think the best outcome would be for that particular group of people. Um, and I was looking at the regimens. I've been on about 4 regimens. But what they didn't tell me until I later on that I found out through my own, each regiment that I've been on affected me in some type of way, and it's irreversible effectiveness of this medication. Cholesterol, high blood pressure, kidney problems. So it's vital to what we have to do. And I was listening to Melanie, and Melanie was talking about the lesser of the 2 evils. That's what that really was, the lesser of the 2 evils. Do I bite the bullet to continue tolerating these other conditions so that I can manage my HIV? You know, I was in that situation at one time. I was taking medicine that was affecting my kidneys and my liver. But through medicine, pharmaceutical companies, they became more patient conscious. They're still making the money, but they became more patient conscious. They realize that what they're doing is to help us, people that's living with HIV. They're hurting us in the same way, so we got to do something with these formularies.
Well, thank you very much, Nathaniel. I think we had Matt.
So I just wanted to, there's no question that the medications have become more tolerable and easier to take. But the problem I have with the question is it says, take my medications every day as prescribed by my doctor for the rest of your life. I find that just, impossible for most people. You're going to miss a dose here and there. I do know people that are amazingly adherent every single day at the same time. A few. But I just wanted to point out that, remember, we need really to focus on long-acting formulations so that this is sort of the next hurdle I believe that we need to get over so that we can complete sort of the antiretroviral picture and make it 100%.
Well, Matt, I hope that you bring up the long-acting formulas when we ask our last question before lunch, which will be, what are you looking for in an ideal treatment? So we'll come back to that. Does anyone else want to follow up on what they've heard? Yes, Wanda.
I have been infected for over 26 years now, and I'm symptomatic. I've had a lot of OIs, opportunity infections, and I want to say that the medicines today are really doing some spectacular work in my life. Even though I'm undetectable, I still have a very low CD4 count, and the medicines are keeping me going.
Thank you very much, Wanda. Anyone else want to follow up on that? Yes, Joe.
Well, again, I think it's important to acknowledge that these questions are phrased in sort of in a sort of isolationist manner. It's to assume that HIV is your one and only or your sort of top line condition that you're working with your provider, hopefully, to manage. And again, for those in the room and others who are, battling multiple conditions, I think it's hard to really bring a sophisticated analysis to these questions without considering the, co-occurring challenges, if you will, of managing multiple conditions. And so I think as we get into the discussion before lunch about the future of pharmacology, there's a rich discussion to have around that.
Yes, Ed.
Yeah, can I just follow up on that? I guess I'm wondering, and we heard in some of the comments earlier, the issue of drug interactions that seems to be an ever-present challenge, both with antiretrovirals and other meds. I'm curious if the panelists might be able to comment more about drug interactions. It sounds like, I think it was David's comments where something sort of popped up a little bit and he didn't recognize the potential for an interaction initially. And given the complexity, the interactions are pharmacists pointing them out to you, or physicians pointing them out to you, or are patients? How do those things surfacing in the real world, and any comments that you might have on that would be appreciated.
Well, I think in my case, most doctors that are practicing HIV or infectious disease or anything are seeing more patients than they can handle. So part of it is capacity in the system. The other piece of that is that this is a relatively new pharmacist, been using the same pharmacy for 11 years. The doctor probably, when he changed regimens, forgot that, didn't look that I was on Lipitor. He's an HIV specialist, he's certified, he's the whole thing, it never happened. And like I said, 2 weeks ago, this relatively new pharmacist working at the pharmacy flagged it. I'm immediately going, what? And so I was as surprised by it as the system, but I think that's just a systematic thing. I mean, maybe with e-prescribing and some of these things that are coming up, that are coming online, those things will be, flagged automatically. That when you're filling a prescription, and it just so happened that this pharmacist called the doctor said, let's reduce the dose. When I go back to see, my follow-up visit in August, I'll say, okay, let's talk about this and see what we can work around. But I think that happens, in this case, I think for a number of reasons. As I mentioned, I think HIV docs, clinicians, people that are working, it's, and medical care in general is get them in, get them out. Unless you're in, some specialized clinic in, some big city that, treats the whole person. That's the other thing. You have, for HIV patients, you're sending them here for this, there for that. If you have the luxury of being in a metropolitan area where you have holistic treatment available to people, where 4 or 5 different people are looking at medical records, probably the chances of that are slimmer. But I think in particularly small rural areas where access to care in general is an issue, that you're lucky to see a doctor, that those things are sort of not looked at as closely. Just my opinion.
So I think both Melanie and Joe, and then we'll see if anyone else wants to comment, and then we'll go take a break after that. So how about Joe first?
I just want to amplify a couple of things David referred to. So at Health HIV, we do a lot of workforce development work with providers and health departments across the country. And we also do an HIV primary care survey every year. We just concluded our 3rd annual survey. And what we're finding is that 40% of primary care providers are seeing HIV populations experiencing multiple conditions that they're having to manage. But as we all know, through many of the reforms that are forthcoming via the ACA, we've been doing a lot of work in these health centers and other facilities to really ramp up the capacity of the primary care provider to provide primary care to HIV affected populations. And there is a huge shortage in the number of primary care docs that know what to do when somebody walks into their office with HIV or is diagnosed with HIV in their setting. And so one of the things that I think we need to really scale up is some really, very stringent CME requirements around this. We're also doing some mentorship initiatives where we're pairing HIV experienced providers with HIV naive providers to be able to provide that additional daily support, so that when someone is in an exam room with somebody that's managing 4 or 5 conditions and they have no idea how to proceed, they can literally pick up the phone and call the more seasoned provider to get some guidance. So I think there's a lot of rich opportunity in the whole workforce arena as well.
Thanks, Joe. Melanie?
To piggyback on what he said about primary care, providers not understanding the complexity of managing multiple conditions. I guess my neurosurgeon just fired me because he said I have too many things going on. He throws his hands up because every time he tries to prescribe something to ease something that's going on in my head or my seizures, it's doesn't work with what I'm already taking for all my other stuff. So he said, go to your primary care and see what they can do to manage it. And so at one time when I was in the hospital with my brain surgery, I was over medicated because they didn't realize that what they were giving me for my seizures and the relieving brain pressure and all that stuff was counterproductive to my HIV meds, and they were putting me in a critical situation, and I didn't know that was happening to me. And when I went back to refill what I got from the hospital, the pharmacist said, how long have you been taking all this stuff together? And I said, 6 weeks. He goes, we have to call all these doctors and figure out something. So that's a scary thing. Mm-hmm. And with ACA coming and people with an insurance card who are used to just going to emergency departments when they think they're deathbed, they're not going to know what to do. They're not going to know what questions to ask. And doctors don't know how to speak to people who have more than one thing going on with them.
Some out out here.
Hi, I'm Dan Tietz from Akria, New York. I just want to add a little bit to what Joe said, and then some to what Dr. Cox asked. As you know, for pivotal drug trials, pretty much they top out in terms of age at 58, mm-hmm. 60, yes. And most folks in ARV drug trials are otherwise, generally speaking, healthy, say for their HIV disease. Yet the people who are going to take those drugs, once approved, are almost to a person have other challenges or on other medications, and yet there's little post-approval, post-marketing follow-up that's really compelled by the FDA from manufacturers to sort of go back and study and report in some really active way what's happening with people